This is Dr. Jerome Corsi, and today it's Monday. It's November 20th, 2023, beginning of Thanksgiving week. First story I want to talk about today is the continuation of the Israeli war. Israel is going to now a tougher phase of the war. Israel is now turning its attention to the South Gaza, and that's where largely the military commanders have gone from Hamas, the terrorist group which attacked Israel on October 7th, has gone south. The southern part of Gaza is fairly densely populated because of all the people fleeing from the north part of Gaza. Why Israel went to the North Gaza first was because that's where the largest city, Gaza City, is in the Gaza Strip. Gaza Strip is this narrow strip of land. It's not very big. On the Mediterranean, just north of Egypt in Israel. Now, the Gaza Strip was created for the Palestinians. It's a long story of the Palestinian history. They've been thrown out of virtually every country in the Middle East they've been in. They were in Egypt. First of all, the Palestinians are a group that is really not the original people who were out of Israel when Israel was created in 1948. Many of those people still are there. They stayed. This whole idea that Israel was created and suddenly all of the Muslims left Israel and went to Gaza, became Palestinians. Yasser Arafat, who headed the Palestinians while he was alive, was an Egyptian. And he was the Egyptian Brotherhood. He was not the Palestinian Liberation Organization. That was a separate Marxist organization. And when the Palestinians were in Egypt, they tried to overthrow the Egyptian government, so the Egyptians threw them out. The same thing happened in Jordan. The same thing happened in Lebanon. Now Israel is throwing them out of Gaza, and I'm not sure. Hamas still controls the West Bank, which is part of Israel by the Jordan River. Now, the Israeli forces have taken control of northern Gaza, but they have only partially destroyed Hamas's military capabilities, and there are many top leaders of Hamas that have yet not been killed or captured. What is the case is that the Israeli troops have moved in to these underground tunnels, largely blowing up the entrances and trying to destroy the tunnels without getting in there and fighting within the tunnels. Hamas would like to have a pause in the fighting in order to regroup and rearm. Israel is going to certainly make it a major effort to destroy the tunnels, especially along Egypt, because that's where Hamas gets much of its supplies, through Egypt, through these tunnels into the Gaza Strip. So with operations shifting, you're going to see a change in the combat strategy, because there's about 2 million people who've lived in the Gaza, and they're now crowded into schools, refugee camps, and homes in the south. Many have left. Many have gotten out of the Gaza Strip. But increasingly, the Palestinian civilians they have dwindling supplies of food. There's a lack of clean water. There's no electricity. Sewage is in the streets. And the dead are reported about 12,000 dead, according to health authorities in the Hamas-run Gaza. Of course, those numbers may be inflated to increase international pressure for a halt in the fighting. Israel's been at this now for about a month, and I don't think this war is going to conclude quickly. I think it's going to go again into the south. It's going to have airstrikes. They're going to be intensifying, going after various of these terrorist groups, including the Houthi, which is another group of terrorists in Yemen. Israel is probably going to take this time to secure itself from attacks from Hamas for a considerable period of time. Now, stories were over the weekend that we are again going to give some $10 billion in released funds back to Iran And this is John Kerry started this with the Iran deal he negotiated under President Obama when he was Secretary of State. And it essentially allowed Iran to eventually build nuclear weapons. They just wanted to postpone it not to be on Obama's term. Well, what's happening now is that Biden has released a lot of money to Iran. Iran has used that money to step up violence in the Middle East and push the United States out of the Middle East. Biden pulled out of Afghanistan and in a fairly precipitous way, leaving a huge amount of military equipment there, which now is in the hands of the terrorists. So you've got a situation in which Iran is seeing an opportunity to develop nuclear weapons and to take control of the Middle East while increasing attacks to destroy Israel. Iran remains committed to destroying Israel, as does Hamas, and there's no possibility of a two-state solution while this is the case. Two-state solution would have to be predicated on a decision that the Muslims had agreed that the Jews had a legitimate right to stay in Israel as their homeland. These fights in the Middle East go back 2,000 years or more, back to Abraham, from which both the Muslims and the Jews come as their heritage traces back to Abraham in the Bible. So we're going to have a continuation of this war. Meanwhile, the tensions in Taiwan continue to increase, and Ukraine, which is now increasingly off of the front page, is still in a stalemate. I would think that Russia has gotten the territory mostly that it wants, and they don't see that Russia has, except maybe to secure its position along the Black Sea in the south. Russia has control now of the parts of Ukraine that are Russian-speaking in the east. But it's amazing how quickly Ukraine has dropped off the corporate news cycle. So the globalist masters here who dominate this woke agenda and dominate the news media are obviously shifting to focus on Israel and intensify the pressure around that war while abandoning Ukraine as a lost cause, which it is. And Europe is a mess because Europe is in the middle of trying to decide if they're going to continue to supply military equipment to Ukraine to fight Russia, when in fact the war doesn't seem to be going anywhere. Biden seems to be providing additional support to Ukraine, wants to do that increasingly. I think the Biden faction of the left, which is obviously ridden with corruption, wants to keep Ukraine open as a corrupt state through which money can be laundered. And again, the corruption here is enormous, and the dangers of escalating violence are tremendous. Okay, now the next story I want to cover, I've been covering the economics, and I'm very concerned that the economics could lead to another global downturn of massive proportions. And there's a story today that caught my attention that affirms the trend I'm seeing. This is in the Wall Street Journal today that landlords are not able, of commercial real estate buildings, can't get loans anymore, and they're beginning to not be able to pay off their previous mortgages. So owners of these commercial buildings, and this has to do with only those commercial buildings that are put into securities. What the investment bankers do on Wall Street is they take the mortgages from homes, put them into collateralized mortgage obligations and sell those as securities, or they take mortgages for commercial buildings and they put those into collateralized commercial building obligations. And they are bought by investors, including institutions, including banks. Now, the problem is that when the occupancy is down in these commercial buildings, you cannot get the value of the building on refinancing to be what it originally was. So you have a commercial loan that often has a balloon payment at the end, anticipating that the next loan for a higher amount, if the building appreciates in value, will allow you to pay off the previous loan's principal. Many of these commercial loans are interest only during their term. Now, the problem is that the crunch in the commercial credit market is intensifying, so that 1 out of every 3 securitized office mortgages that expired during the first 9 months of 2023 was paid off in September. This is one of the measures of how strong the commercial mortgage market is and its impact on securitized office mortgages. They tried to look and say how many are paid off in September. So the smallest share for the first 9 months of any year since 2008, and well below the number reached in 2009, when 47% of these commercial commercial building mortgage loans were paid off. The share now is below where it was in 2008, when the crisis in subprime mortgages started. So again, that's a measure that we're going back into a time that could be worse than the 2008-2009 global financial crisis. Okay, so if 1 out of 3 is all that are refinanced, we are getting into a very serious problem. That's 33% as opposed to 47% in 2009, when we were just beginning to recover from the crash in subprime mortgages. So while the numbers cover only the office mortgages packed into bonds, so-called commercial mortgage-backed securities, they reflect a broader freeze in the lending market for office buildings. Many office owners can't pay back their old loans because they can't get new mortgages. Remote work and rising vacancies have hit building profits, making it harder to pay interest. Higher interest rates have pushed debt costs up and building values down. Okay, so the combination is going to produce an increase in defaults. The share of commercial mortgage-backed security loans that are delinquent has tripled over the past year to 5.75%. Again, that does not help many banks who hold these securities as assets, and insurance companies as well hold them as assets. As this debt crisis develops, what you're going to see is a massive downturn in the economy and possibly more bank failures, because if the banks have to mark their assets to market, in this condition, they're going to have to take haircuts, reduce the book value of the commercial mortgage-backed securities that they own. That's going to impact banks. It's going to impact insurance companies and other investment vehicles. It's the beginning of a downturn that could cascade. Once one of these things begin failing, so the commercial banks are not going to provide loans to owners of commercial buildings that allow them to pay off the previous mortgage. That impacts then the commercialized mortgage securities, which default. That impacts the banks and insurance companies, which now have a hit on their assets. That impacts the derivative market, which are these complex bets made on how interest rates are going to go and how these various kinds of bonds are going to perform. This is a beginning of a downturn that I think could be very serious. That's what I want to focus on. And Chris will show you the free book. I'm encouraging you to get a copy, because we're seeing a combination right now of the 1970s, when we have a war in the Middle East. Then it was the Yom Kippur War, and then we had the OPEC oil embargo that followed. Now we've got the Hamas-Israel war, and we could easily see oil tighten and oil prices again quadruple, which they did during the Arab oil embargo during 1973. That's when gold went to $843 an ounce. Then, as I'm talking about now, the economic collapse of the subprime mortgage market in 2008, 2009, gold went to $1,426 an ounce. COVID lockdown, another crisis, gold went to over $2,000 an ounce. This is the book. I wrote it with Dean Heskin of Swiss America. You can get a free copy by calling Swiss America at 1-800 1-800-519-6268. I'm going to repeat that number, 1-800-519-6268. Call that number to get your free copy of How the Coming Global Crash Will Create an Historic Gold Rush. And I'm going to check the price of gold and give Chris an opportunity here to comment on the first two stories today.
Taking a step back, you did mention that Zelensky and Ukraine have been off the corporate media headlines for a long, long time. I know the New World Order types are looking to steer our minds and distract us. The corporate media is also looking for green. They're looking for what attracts ratings. They don't care what happens around the world, or else we'd be talking about slavery in North Africa. We'd be talking about other issues going on around the world if they were as sexy as what's going on or what happened in Ukraine and what's going on with Israel and Gaza. The thing is, though, let's all watch and see what's happening behind the scenes. And this is where the second story, and of course your next few are coming out, people aren't realizing what's happening in these major cities. They see the crime. They see these films of people swarming businesses and things like that, but they don't see the other economic realities. The fact that money is running out when it comes to taxes. Eric Adams is already readjusting his city's budget thanks to the influx of immigrants in there and other price problems. What you're seeing now is offices, businesses are not able to conduct what they need to conduct in the city anymore. And this is bad.
Well, you've got a situation where the cities in the United States are deteriorating fast.
Right.
And crime is increasing dramatically. You're bringing in immigrants and dumping them in hotels in New York City. New York City will soon be bankrupt. Businesses are leaving, and the commercial real estate values are dropping. When New York loses tax revenue, there's no way that New York can maintain police force, which is, retiring in mass numbers.
They're cutting hours, or at least the proposal is to cut hours now.
It's going to make the city much less safe, much more difficult. And that's happening all across the country. They cleaned up San Francisco last week only because Biden was meeting with Xi from China on this international trade Asian meeting that was being held near San Francisco. They cleaned out the homelessness for that only. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Let's just continue with the stories here, Chris. Let's hit this one about beef. The globalist World Economic Forum group are waging a war on food. Brazilian processor, which is one of the it's Marfrig Global Foods, warned that the U.S. cattle herd will continue shrinking toward the midpoint of the decade, and less supplies will pressure meat packers and keep the prices of steak and hamburgers at elevated levels. So in recent years, we've seen high feed costs, which have forced ranchers in the Midwest to send cows to slaughterhouses, leaving a sharp reduction in the nation's overall herd size. In January, the beef cow herd size was the smallest since 1962. This has hurt the profits of meat packers, including Tyson Foods, and the declining cattle numbers have sent U.S. beef prices to record highs. And U.S. beef exports are forecast to slide 14% this year from 2022 to 3 billion pounds, the lowest since the early days of the COVID pandemic, when plant closures crushed meat packers. So the USDA is warning that the production is going to decline further in 2024. Again, food inflation is one of the impacts on the middle class that is not typically reported. And food prices are not even included often in the calculations of inflation. Various of these indices exclude food and energy costs in order to keep the inflation numbers down. Now, this is all part of the woke agenda, in that we are not supposed to, they want to shift us from eating cows, beef, because the cow's eggs fart methane. And this is supposed to be going to destroy the planet and global warming, which I've been pointing out now for months is a hoax. I've written a book, The Truth About Energy, Global Warming, and Climate Change. And that book, if you read it, it's the first of my trilogy on the Great Awakening trilogy. And I point out that carbon dioxide is a trace molecule of the atmosphere, 0.04%. Water vapor is 70% of greenhouse gases. We would not be able to Earth would not be uninhabitable, if we didn't have greenhouse gases, because when the sun isn't shining, call that night, all the irradiation that comes into the Earth during the day from the sun would evaporate into outer space. And we would have, again, very cold planet. The next story on this is that New York City is now realizing that various of these laws passed on going to electric vehicles are not going to work. The infrastructure is just not there. New York will go dark. New York City going dark is, again, a potential, given all the problems we see in New York with taxation and everything else. So the Empire State has established zero emissions for the year 2030. And what they're saying is that large numbers of electric vehicles, especially the shared ride forces like Uber and Lyft, other share ride companies, are going to be pressured to go entirely electric vehicle by 2030, although taxi cabs will not be so forced. So right now, 2,200 of the city's 78,000 cars are currently authorized by the city's Taxi and Limousine Commission as app-based ride shares. This means Uber and Lyft, rather than traditional taxi services, are EVs. They're going to be forced to be EVs by 2030. The rest are normal cars, gas-powered cars. At the end of 2026, the Taxi and Limousine Commission expects that the number of EVs in this ride share market is going to reach 25% of the overall fleet, which leaves just a few more years to convert the remaining 75% of cars in New York City to electric vehicles, which is going to be an impossible feat. First, there's not enough places to plug these vehicles in. If you don't have the right plug, that charging station may not work. In New York City, many vehicles are parked on the curb at night. There are not that many garages. So there's no place to have a garage-based charger at nighttime. How are you going to charge your cars? Only 187 EV fast chargers currently exist in New York City. If the electric car fleet matches the 21,000 EV benchmark that this Taxi and Limousine Commission hopes to achieve by the year 2027, the city will need many more than the mere 1,000 direct current fast chargers that currently exist throughout the city. So first of all, now there's only 187 fast chargers. We get up to this 2027 level with 1,000 direct current fast chargers. Well, again, that's not going to be enough if we've got the entire 78,000 fleet of cars in New York City converting to electric vehicles. Fast chargers can top an electric vehicle battery in 20 minutes as opposed to an hour. Such fast chargers would make EVs more comparable to gas-powered cars, which, coupled with a meandering ride to the gas station, takes about 20 minutes to get a fill up in New York City. But the point is, with Manhattan having so few charging ability, and Manhattan really not set up to handle, the infrastructure to handle charging that would go on throughout the night when the transmission of the transformers are usually cooling off. This transition to electric vehicles, this green transition, is proving to be more of an ideologically driven move than a practical one. It's certainly not economics driven. And then if we take a look at Climate Depot, Mark Morano's site, what we find, hold on a second, what we find is in climate, I'm just going to go there right now because Mark is reporting on the discussions with Xi and Biden, and evidently John Kerry's done it again. John Kerry has got an agreement that we are going to dramatically increase the move to shutting down fossil fuel production in the United States. Now, this is an insane idea. Why? Well, it's good for China. John Kerry is again benefiting not the United States. Everything John Kerry does seems to be to our detriment. I've been opposed to John Kerry since I co-authored Unfit for Command. Swiftboat veterans speak out against John Kerry with John O'Neill, Swiftboat commander, whom I've known for a long time, since we were 17 years old. John O'Neill commanded Kerry's boat in Vietnam after Kerry left with his 3 Purple Hearts that we maintained were fraudulently won. Now, this deal Kerry negotiated that we will end fossil fuel production, and we're going to be moving towards this goal in 2030, accelerating the pace with which we phase out the use of coal, natural gas, and oil, which, by the way, are not fossil fuels. They're naturally produced by the earth on an ongoing basis, would benefit China because China is manufacturing many of the batteries, the electric vehicles. China would gain that production at a cheaper rate than the rest of the world could do it. And China still makes these agreements to cut its emissions when they don't have no intention of doing so. China has still got going Fischer-Tropsch plants, the largest in the world, which makes oil and petroleum products out of coal. They use the equations developed by the chemists in the Weimar Republic in Germany between wars, which German chemists figured out how oil is synthesized, made naturally, not from dinosaurs, but within the mantle of the earth. We're taking something with carbon, something with hydrogen, presence of a catalyst like iron oxide, all of which exist. These minerals exist inside the Earth's mantle. Intense heat and pressure, and hydrocarbon chains are formed. If we did accelerate this transition, what we would be doing is not only lowering the standard of living in the United States with all the different aspects of this global green agenda, but we would also be dramatically harming the developing world or the undeveloped world because they would not have the cheap energy they need to produce food for their populations. This is a depopulation movement. It's aimed at hating people. We exhale carbon dioxide. So what these people are saying is that by exhaling carbon dioxide, we are the cause of our own destruction. They call this age the Anthropocene. Anthropos meaning human being in Greek, suggesting we are the cause of our own destruction. Now, when you examine these kinds of agreements, again, I'm saying these are ideological agreements that are not practical in terms of where the grid is today, but yet John Kerry is pushing this agenda in part because he, I think, knows it damages the United States. John Kerry is a globalist who sees a world in which the United States is not so powerful. According to the International Energy Agency, China produces 75% of all lithium-ion batteries, which is a key component of electric vehicles worldwide. The nation also has 70% of production capacity for cathodes and 85% for anodes, 2 key parts of such batteries. In addition, more than 50% of lithium, cobalt, and graphite processing and refining capacity is located in China, according to the IEA. This agreement is a boon for China, and John Kerry, and Biden have just agreed to it without considering the consequences to the United States or the undeveloped world. Now, this leads me to the last story I want to cover, which is that in Argentina yesterday, and I was watching the returns coming in yesterday in Argentina on Argentinian television, there was a surprise win for a candidate who is opposed to the woke agenda. This is an anti-woke central bank nemesis, Javier Milei, M-I-L-E-I, who won the Argentinian presidential election. He was a libertarian candidate, not libertarian in the sense that, the Cato Institute is libertarian in the sense that he rejects the woke agenda. And he fights, is dramatically opposed to this hard left, which is dominating much of the United States, South America, and Western Europe. He's a 53-year-old far-right economist, and I'd say far-right. No, he's an economist who understands true economics, former television pundit. He had no governing experience, but he got 56% of the vote with more than 80% of the votes tallied, and Sergio Massa, who was was defeated. He was a center-left economic minister who was not able to resolve the country's problems, which have worsened over the past 2 decades. 40% of the Argentinian population has now fallen into poverty. This is the exact result of what you get with leftist population, with the woke, the neo-Marxists, the cultural Maoists taking over. The Kirchner presidency, which was modeling the previous presidencies, which were modeling Perón, going back to the 1940s, have put socialism at the heart of what Argentina is about. And that's meant they've gone through hyperinflation. You have to have a mound of cash in order to just go out to have dinner in Argentina. You see, this Milei has been branded. He said that Pope Francis is an evil leftist. Milei has called climate change a socialist lie and said he would hold a referendum to undo the 3-year-old law that legalized abortion. He's pledged to dollarize the economy, shut down the central bank, and cut the number of permanent government ministries from 18 to 8. Sounds good to me. I wish we would do it here. And he's been, I think, going to be a massive indication that this woke agenda, people are finally waking up, that this neo-Marxism produces only economic misery, starvation, poverty. It's what communism has produced all over the world. And Christopher will show the title of my 2nd volume in this Great Awakening series, which is The Truth About Neo-Marxism, Cultural Maoism, and Anarchy. I think finally you can see that populations around the world are waking up to the insanity of the left. And if you listen to some of the interviews that Milei has given, he's just outspoken, saying that you can't deal with the left. They don't want to talk. They are totalitarian. They have they destroy whatever they touch. And he was very, very graphic and explicit about it. Tucker Carlson went down to Argentina and interviewed Milei. It's on the internet now. It's about 40 minutes, very worthwhile listening to. It's translated. Milei's Argentinian Spanish is very good. But the point is, this is a watershed movement in that we see the rejection in a country that has been moving left since the 1940s is now finally waking up and saying this is economic disaster. One of the potentially richest countries in the world has gone into the condition that New York City is headed into because of this leftist insanity. Chris, any final comments before we wrap up?
This is another in a movement of the people fighting back against the woke agenda, the International World Economic Forum order, if you will. We saw this in Italy quite a few times, and now with Giorgia Meloni running Italy, that kind of makes these people whine. Hungary, obviously, it's another one. We had the Czech Republic. We have a lot of leaders here being elected to office who are fighting back against the international woke agenda. What's what we might see and what it looks like is going to happen, this is my prediction, by the way, in Argentina, is you're going to see what happened in Brazil. There's going to be an onslaught from the corporate media there. There's going to be an onslaught from the international media calling this guy some sort of racist, Trumpian, if you will, every name under the book until they sway just enough people to get their guy back in. Again, just like what happened in Brazil.
Well, that's going to be the pushback, I'm sure.
Right. But we're pushing back.
I think we are. I think more people are catching on. And let's wrap it up. This is the Thanksgiving week. It's a holiday in which we should be, again, giving thanks to God. And I always say, in the end, God always wins. God will win here, too. We are in for the judgment of God. We have done too many evil things. A story is out there about one of the international designers who was famous for the last 40 years, and he had dedicated his life to blurring the lines of gender, creating this woke agenda, not believing in God. When human beings stop believing in God, human beings turn destructive. And it is good and evil. It is Satan. It is the evil forces which human beings are capable of exhibiting. And it's frightening. We could go easily here into a nuclear war without much difficulty in the Middle East if that war expands. We could go into a global economic crisis, and it wouldn't take much to cause this massive debt that we've accumulated to collapse. So, again, I remain hopeful. I think the Bible gives us a solution. It's 2 Chronicles 7:14. Let's get on our knees and ask God to forgive us for letting the condition get here, cutting apart so many babies in the womb, killing them before they have a chance to take a breath outside the womb, taking God out of our schools, out of our marriages, out of our lives, allowing the churches to go to this liberation theology. These are efforts we must fight. And if we do, praying to God to forgive us, taking responsibility for letting our society get to this point, God will hear our prayer, and heal our land. I think enough people are doing this, especially this week in Thanksgiving week. Please give it additional attention. Get out the Bible, start reading it. You'll find passages that apply to your life and give you instruction and guidance and hope. The Bible always says, fear not. We need not fear here. We need trust in God. This is Dr. Jerome Corsi. Today is Monday. It's November 20th, 2023. Thank you for joining us. We will be back for the next 2 days. We'll be taking a break over the Thanksgiving holiday, and then we'll be back the following Monday. But we'll be here tomorrow and Wednesday. Thank you for joining us. God bless.